Good evening. Today is November 18th, 2020. Hope everybody's been having a good day. It was 65 years ago today, on November 18th, 1965. A very interesting man who had contributed a lot to many people and many institutions, including not the least of which was the United States of America, passed away. His name was Henry Agard Wallace. And uh, he was truly a great public servant, born near Orient, Iowa, in Adair County on the 7th of October, 1888. At the age of 16, he conducted his first experiments with seed corn. In 1923, such experiments culminated with the production of the first successful hybrid seed corn for commercial use. In 1926, he founded the Pioneer Hybrid Seed Company, of which he served as president until 1933. It was in the year of 1910 that Henry Wallace had graduated from Iowa State College in Ames with a major in agriculture. From 1910 to 1924, he served as an associate editor, and from the time of his father's death in 1924 until his appointment as Secretary of Agriculture in 1933 as senior editor of Wallace's Farmer and Iowa Homestead, a newspaper founded by his grandfather. So you have three generations of Henry Wallace. You have Henry Wallace, they called him Uncle Henry, the grandfather, who was at one time a Presbyterian pastor. And you have Henry Cantwell Wallace, his son, and Henry Agard Wallace, his son. The four complementary pillars on which Wallace's agrarian philosophy was based were economics, science, religion, and politics. He wrote a number of books on agriculture and politics, including Whose Constitution, Paths to Plenty, The American Choice, 60 Million Jobs, The Century of the Common Man, Corn and the Midwestern Farmer, Corn and Corn Growing, and Statesmanship and Religion. In 1932, Democratic presidential nominee Franklin Delano Roosevelt, seeking to initiate contacts with important farm leaders, arranged a meeting with Wallace and was impressed with his views on the need for basic social and economic reform. Editorials in Wallace's Farmer helped put Iowa, a largely Republican state, into the Democratic column. After his election, President Roosevelt appointed Henry Wallace as Secretary of Agriculture. Wallace immediately confronted the immense responsibility of implementing a program of relief for American farmers. In 1938, he influenced Congress to pass the Agricultural Adjustment Act. At the heart of this act was the idea of the ever-normal granary, by which surpluses were stored up in times of abundance in order to achieve stability of farm prices and to guarantee plentiful supplies of food in times of scarcity. His ideas on the subject have been compared to that of Joseph during his service as Prime Minister and Chief Grain Merchant to Pharaoh in ancient Egypt. And in 1940, after having served 2 terms as Secretary of Agriculture, Wallace was selected by Franklin D. Roosevelt in his third race in office as his vice presidential running mate. Following Roosevelt's election to an unprecedented third term, Wallace played an important role in making foreign policy and served as chair of the Supply Priorities and Allocations Board and the Board of Economic Warfare. In 1944, he received a major disappointment. when the Democratic National Convention, due to pressure from Southern conservatives and big city political bosses, dropped him from the ticket and nominated Harry S. Truman, senator from Missouri, for vice president. Roosevelt was elected to a fourth and final term and gave Wallace the position of Secretary of Commerce as a consolation prize. On April the 12th, 1945, Roosevelt succumbed to a stroke at Warm Springs, Georgia, and Harry Truman became president. In September of 1946, Wallace resigned his office as Secretary of Commerce in a dispute over policy toward the Soviet Union. After a brief tenure as editor of the New Republic, Wallace announced his candidacy for the president on the Progressive Party ticket in Chicago on the 29th of December 1947. He saw the progressives as true heirs of the New Deal. He felt the New Deal had been abandoned by Truman. And Wallace didn't do too well in this race. He came in fourth, following Truman, who was the winner. Then Republican nominee Thomas E. Dewey, who came in second, and the Dixiecrat nominee Strom Thurmond, who came in third. Now, Wallace, like many of the prominent government leaders of his day, was a Freemason. He received the degree of entered apprentice on the 20th of September, 1927, passed the degree of fellowcraft on the 27th of September, 1927, and raised to the sublime degree of a Master Mason on the 4th of October, 1927, in Capitol Lodge number 110, Des Moines, Iowa. He received the 32nd degree in the Des Moines Scottish Rite Bodies on the 23rd of November, 1928. After moving to Washington, D.C., he affiliated with the District of Columbia Scottish Rite Bodies on January 15, 1935. He continued his Masonic involvement throughout his years as Secretary of Agriculture, Vice President, and Secretary of Commerce. On the 7th of October, 1932, while serving as editor of Wallace's Farmer, he received a letter from S.R. Lynn of the Story County State Bank in Roland, Iowa, inquiring as to the religious denomination and the Masonic affiliations of Lewis Murphy, the Democrat candidate for U.S. Senator. In his reply, he stated that he did not have the answer to this question and said, "My suggestion is that in politics, you forget all about Masonic and church affiliations and concentrate on the problem of economic justice." And in 1934, while serving as Secretary of Agriculture, Henry Wallace saw a picture of the reversal of the Great Seal of the United States. He took it to President Roosevelt. He reported Roosevelt, as he looked at the colored representation of the seal, was first struck with the representation of the all-seeing eye, a Masonic representation of the great architect of the universe. Next, he was impressed with the idea that the foundation for the new order of the ages had been laid in 1776. It would be completed only under the eye of the great architect. Roosevelt, like myself, was a 32nd degree Mason. He suggested the seal be put on the dollar bill. And that's how the pyramid and all-seeing eye got there. My friend Brent Morris in Washington, D.C. has written a pamphlet, very interesting pamphlet called Eye of the Pyramid, in which he makes the case that the Masonic influences on the Great Seal of the United States have been greatly exaggerated. That was a symbol from the Enlightenment, and the committee that was responsible for adopting it included both Masons and non-Masons. And On February 19, 1942, while serving as vice president, he wrote a letter to Major Charles S. Coulter, Director of Welfare for the Masonic Service Association, in which he stated, "I know that the Masons are motivated by the highest sense of patriotism, as they have always been from the very moment of the founding of the Republic. I know your sole concern is that which will best serve our beloved country. I am glad to know of the mechanism you have for service and the spirit in which you propose to serve. The very heart of the nation is respect for the individual human soul. The present struggle, therefore, is one in which should arouse to an utmost for which is deepest and best in Masonry." In addition to being involved in Masonry, uh, Wallace had a considerable amount of religious involvement. While he was raised a Presbyterian, he dabbled for a while in theosophy and became a member of the liberal Catholic Church, which has theosophical connections. For a while, he was associated with a very controversial man named Nicholas Roerich, a Russian mystic, and they had correspondence which were meant to be private, but somehow they got into the public sector, and it caused Wallace great embarrassment. And eventually he cut his ties with Roerich. Roerich, by the way, is seen by many theosophists and others as among the ascended masters who have a part in what they call the Great White Brotherhood. And it's understandable how that would be a controversial thing. Wallace, as a farmer and scientist, had a great deal of awe for nature and was greatly impressed by Native American religious traditions. He eventually became an active member of the Episcopal Church. It appears that he had temporarily dropped out of Masonry shortly after launching his 1948 presidential campaign. He demitted from the District of Columbia Scottish Rite Bodies on the 2nd of December 1947 and from Capitol Lodge number 110 on the 13th of January 1948. While serving as editor of the New Republic, he settled near South Salem, New York at Farview Farm, which he and his sister had purchased in 1945. After the 1948 campaign, he spent most of his time on the farm, resuming his genetic experiments with corn, poultry, gladioli, and strawberries. On the 10th of December 1955, he wrote a letter to former President Harry Truman, saying, "It deeply disturbs me to refute statements from time to time which indicates differences between you and me. We who have served the same government and the same party and for the time in the same capacity. We have both taken the same Masonic vows. We both strive to serve the same God. And at this joyous holiday season, we can both pray that the message of the Prince of Peace will finally carry weight on earth, even as it triumphs in heaven." The subsequent article, which appeared in the New York Times, described Wallace and Truman as fellow Masons. Wallace had been raised a Republican, but he became a Democrat in service in the administration of Franklin D. Roosevelt. He later had some falling outs with the Democratic Party, and in 1956 he announced his support for Dwight D. Eisenhower for a second term. In 1960, he was deeply disturbed about the rise of John F. Kennedy and ended up voting for Richard Nixon in the presidential election. He declared that Nixon's foreign policies were fiscally sound while Kennedy's were inflationary. The Republicans didn't have a whole lot of love for Henry Wallace, and they were caught off guard. Their response was, regardless of what else he might have been, Henry Wallace was certainly an authority on agriculture. 1964, though, he returned to the Democratic Party, going back to his home state of Iowa. Even though he had supported Nixon, he was invited by John F. Kennedy to attend his inauguration, and he accepted the offer. He was won over, and he compared the new frontier of Kennedy to the early days of Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal. After the assassination of John F. Kennedy on the 22nd of November, 1963, Henry Wallace became a supporter of Richard Nixon, taking the stump for him in the Iowa campaign. And so he supported LBJ, and he Lyndon Johnson over Barry Goldwater. And he had as I say, he was involved a lot with agriculture and religious and fraternal work. It was on the 11th of February 1964, after 16 years with no active involvement in Masonry, Wallace affiliated with Kisco Lodge number 708, Mount Kisco, New York. On the 29th of May 1964, he wrote to Lloyd K. Perry, Secretary of the Des Moines Scottish Rite Bodies, stating that he had affiliated with Kisco Lodge number 708 and had decided to become an active dues-paying member of a New York Scottish Rite Temple. On the 1st of June 1964, Perry wrote back, expressing pleasure in Wallace's plans and also sadness at the news of the death of a brother Koch, a mutual friend who encouraged Wallace to reinstate. Perry said, having known of Brother Koch's interest in you, I know he would have been very happy to know that you're in the process of restoring their membership. On the 10th of September 1964, he was elected to membership in the Long Island Scottish Rite Bodies. In this letter of acceptance, Secretary Henry R. Horn wrote, "We are very glad to have you with us, and we hope that you will spend many pleasant years of association with our valley." Sadly, Wallace did not have many pleasant years left. In early 1965, he was diagnosed with ALS, the rare and fatal disease of the nervous system that had claimed the life of New York Yankee star Lou Gehrig. The condition grew progressively worse. Then, on 18th of November 1965, which was 55 years ago today, Wallace died in Danbury Hospital in Danbury, Connecticut. He was 77 years old. The official autopsy gave the cause of death in clinical terms, but did not record the undaunted courage of a man waiting patiently until released from life by his maker. Wallace's funeral was held on the 20th of November 1965 at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in Ridgeville, Connecticut, a community across the state line not far from South Salem. Wallace had attended St. Stephen's for a number of years. The service was followed by cremation at the Mountain Grove Crematorium in Bridgeport, Connecticut. On the 22nd of November, a memorial service was held at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Des Moines, Iowa. On the following day, the cremains of Henry Wallace were interred in the Wallace family plot at Glendale Cemetery in Des Moines. In January 1966, Scottish Rite Masons in New York were informed of the death of a new yet beloved 32nd degree brother. It is with a feeling of regret that we note the passing of the distinguished brother of our valley. He spent many years of his life in service of his country and for humanity. On September 10, 1964, he affiliated with the Valley of Rockville Center. It is to be regretted that between his late affiliation with our bodies and his early passing from our midst, so few of us had the opportunity to know better this great public servant and Mason. When the Long Island chapter of Rose Croix celebrated the Feast of the Paschal Lamb at the Freeport High School Auditorium in Freeport, New York, on Maundy Thursday, 7th of April, 1966. Wallace was among a number of Scottish Rite Masons remembered during the eulogy of the dead. Wallace's life priorities are expressed well in the book of the prophet Micah, chapter 4, verses 3 through 5, one of his favorite scriptures. He shall judge among many people and rebuke nations afar. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up a sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. But they shall sit every man under his vine, under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid. For the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken it. For all people will walk, every one, in the name of his God. We will walk in the name of the Lord of our God forever and ever. There was a country band out of New York called the Hang Dogs. I believe they're no longer performing together. They were led by a man from Iowa named Matthew Graham. I met him on one occasion. He was the author of the song Wallace 48. Like me, Matthew Graham was an admirer of Henry Wallace. Said, brothers, have you heard the news? There's another war brewing with 60 million still upon the ground. Truman swore to give them hell, all the all might burn as well. But there's a man who says we got more than guns and bombs to go around. Oh, the captain's gone to glory, but his good first mate remains. He's that quiet Iowa farmer. Henry Wallace is his name. No more war or hatred. He's the uncommon champion of the common man. Said, Republican or Democrat, the bosses call the shots. And I forget all the lyrics to it, but it's a good song. Wallace 48 by the Hang Dogs. And so that is my tribute to one of my heroes, Henry Agard Wallace, on the 55th anniversary of his death. Have a good evening.